In 1966, a 22-year-old Bob Russell had graduated from Cincinnati Bible College. He moved to Louisville, Kentucky, where he was the second minister to take the helm of Southeast Christian Church. It's about 120 people. 40 years later, that church is running 18,000 people. Bob Russell never left, had a one-church ministry career of 40 plus years, and did incredible things. Now in his retirement, he's continuing to teach and to mentor. And Bob and I had a sit down today, 1 hour incredible conversation that I hope you'll enjoy. So Bob, I reached out to two of your friends and they gave me two questions that I need to ask. I'm going to start with one, I'm going to end with one. And the first question that somebody said, you got to ask them about the story of Eugene Wigington. What is that story?
Well, when I started in Bible college, you could go to school and then pay your bill the following summer. And my sophomore year, I came in and they said, we've changed our position. You have to pay your bill up front. And I didn't have the money to do that. And I played on the basketball team, and some of the singing groups got financial breaks for singing, but I got no financial break for playing on it. And I was really disgusted with the school for not communicating that and a few other things. You know how in school you get to griping and complaining.
Yeah.
So a buddy of mine, my roommate and I drove up to Ball State. I don't know why Ball State, but I was going to transfer to Ball State and see if I could make their basketball team. We griped and complained all the way back, and somehow Eugene Wigington was on staff at that time. He's in his probably late 20s, and he came to me this privately, and he said, Russell, you see this amount right here? That's taken off your bill. And I don't know whether they had scholarship money or what it was, but that little bit of just showing some concern, that's all I needed to hear. I was back in school.
That's awesome.
And, always grateful to Eugene Wigington, who's still alive, by the way. I sometimes him on phone.
So let me follow up on that. You were able to stay in one place. I think if I got my numbers right, you were 22 going into Southeast. You were the second minister to go there. Stayed there for over 40 years. Did you continually have Eugene Wigington's, in your locker room? Did you have to have that continually, somebody like that, to stay in one place that long?
Yeah, I didn't intentionally seek out those people, but God provided them for me. Guys who were a little bit older than me, who believed in me and encouraged me. When I came to Louisville, there was Bill Gaslin, who was 15 years older than I, preacher at Shively Christian Church. And Southeast started growing, and he had every reason to either be jealous or resentful of thinking I was arrogant. But he took me under his wing, always invited me to come to his week of camp, and I was the Vesper speaker. And when I had concerns, I could go to Bill and talk to him very easy. And he was a great friend and an encourager. Paul Carrier, do you know the name of Paul Carrier?
Yeah.
He became the president of Atlanta Christian College at the time. He was in town, and he was fun to be around. So when I had an opportunity to go to another church in my early 30s, one of the 8 or 10 most influential churches in our brotherhood at the time, their preacher had retired, and they came to me and said, Bob, we're thinking about going to a younger man. We're impressed with what you're doing at Southeast. We want to hire you as our preacher. And I went to Paul Carrier and said, I've got this opportunity to go to this church. And he looked at me and he said, why do you want to go to a church with a great past when you're at a church with a great future? And that left a real impact on me. And I, from that point on, decided that since things are going well at Southeast, I would have opportunities from time to time to go somewhere, but I was just going to stay unless I was totally miserable and unhappy. And most of the time, I would just say, I'm not interested in leaving. Let me give you the name of somebody else. Or when things were going bad and I was willing to leave, nobody showed up. But I stayed for 40 years, and I've always been thankful that I did that. And there's an old saying about bloom where you're planted. And I think if you get the place where you say, okay, this is where God's planted me. These are the sheep He's given me. I'm going to make the most of this opportunity. I'm not going to be comparing to other people. I'm not going to be restless. I'm just going to stick it out. And I'm always glad that I stayed.
That's good. What would you tell a guy or gal that maybe doesn't have those kind of people around, them that they're not speaking positively into them, and it's hard and it's difficult? What do you say to those people that they probably are looking, they probably are itching or just tired and they want to change? What's your advice?
Well, not everybody's supposed to stay 40 years.
Yeah.
The Apostle Paul moved on, and I run into some really talented guys who are great Christian guys who are in a church that doesn't deserve them. And there's so much dysfunctional leadership. And unless you can completely stay long enough to outlive the leadership or replace the leadership, some of these guys, you can't take a one talent leader and make him a 10 talent leader. You can't take a one talent elder and make him a 10 talent elder. So either you make up your mind, this is where God's planted you and you're going to stay and love the people, or you say, okay, this is just I'm just being trained here for another opportunity elsewhere. But I think if you don't have people in your church who encourage you or in your circle of influence, seek somebody out, poke around a little bit and call some preachers or there, I have preachers call me, and I hope I can encourage them, and I welcome that. I mean, that's what I do in retirement. That's what you're going to do in the next phase of your life, and you'd love to have the opportunity to come alongside somebody. So don't sit there and lick your own wounds and realize you might be in a bad situation and say, I need to talk to somebody who will gripe with me,
Yeah.
who will listen to my gripe. I didn't do very well going to preachers meetings, but I got in touch with two or three other guys in my city who were in growing situations I had something in common with. We'd have breakfast once a month. And to this day, those guys will stop me and say, those breakfasts really helped me. And we didn't do anything but gripe and complain about our church, but it's just helpful that somebody else understood.
Sure, sure. Hey, 40 years, especially in one place, there had to be such huge highs, but there had to be seasons of discouragement. Are there some commonalities, things that you consistently did to stay focused?
Yeah. Every preacher has times of discouragement. Uh, I've heard Tom Ellsworth say, they came every Monday for a while, and then for a while they came between the first and second service. When they start coming between the first and second service, it's getting serious. Uh, you know, uh, when the numbers go flat, when you have criticism, everybody boasts about they learn to get tough skin, but criticism bothers everybody. My brother is 3 years younger than I. He's been in ministry 50 years. And I think it was last summer, he does a lot of inner ministry. He texted me, and one Sunday afternoon, and I can remember his text almost verbatim. All I said was, God's plan for marriage is one man for one woman for one lifetime, and that means that uh, adultery, cohabitation, homosexuality are outside God's will. An angry family met me at the door and said, we're never coming back. It's just that kind of hate speech that caused our son to commit suicide. Why can't you just love everybody?
Mm,
Now, just one word. I mean, he just mentioned
yeah.
homosexuality. That would have never happened 40 years ago. It's tougher in ministry today. Criticism, people they've got their antennas up. They're so quick to anger. But my question is, why did my brother text me on Sunday afternoon?
Hmm.
Because that criticism hurt him after 50 years of ministry. Why did he text me? Because he knew I was the one guy who would get just as mad as he was and fight with him. And
Yeah.
I understood. So ministry has a lot of discouraging times. 20 in boost comments about your sermon boosting you up. One criticism, you go home worried about the one criticism. And then we've got staff issues. And I had staff issues. And if you wait until everything is 100% perfect in your church before you're happy, you got a long wait. And I think we have to learn to deal with imperfections and people the way God deals with us, and be contented to. I tell people all the time, 95% of Southeast Christian Church was great. 4% was not so hot. And 1% was nasty.
Mm.
And my problem as a leader all the time was 50% of my time was focused on that 5% trying to correct it. And I would lose the big picture. And I needed to get away sometimes, or to have an encounter with somebody sometimes to remind me, hey, some great things are happening. People are getting saved here. People are being boosted up. People love this church. There's some wonderful things happening here. But you lose the big picture as a preacher, and you need to find some way to keep going through the discouragement and to have exposure to people who will help you to see the big picture.
Bob, you probably know some of these same numbers, but there's a lot of stats coming out about younger pastors these days. Some like 40% under the age of 45 are on the verge of burnout or ready to quit or are quitting. And so, how is it different? Like when you look at the world today, and then when you started in 1966 with Southeast, what do you tell a young pastor who's dealing with all kinds of instabilities, like political and economical and AI and all things, gender confusion, some trends even within church world? Like, what do you tell a young guy these days? And is it a lot different than when you were coming in?
Oh, it's super different. I think even in the last 20 years, it's a lot tougher today. When I first started preaching 60 years ago, Christianity was the norm, and it was a whole. About 10 years after I retired, I was on a panel discussion at Southern Baptist Seminary in front of preachers, and we all made two professors and me, and we each made a brief statement. Then they just threw it open to questions. The very first question was, what should a preacher do if a transgender wants to join the church? I gulped because I had absolutely no idea how to answer that question.
Yeah.
Fortunately, the two professors had recently done papers on that subject, and they went on for 10 minutes about this and that. And came my time, I had to say something, and I said, you know what I think? I think I retired just on time.
Yeah.
I mean, you think about all the gender issues, homosexual same-sex marriage, all the Trump stuff and the animosity that filters into the church, and all the political issues and battles, and people are so angry. We didn't have to face that 20 years ago. So I think it's a lot tougher. So when I talk to young guys, I tell them, look, you got to be battle hardened. There's some occupations that when you're going in, a referee, a coach, a politician, you're going to get hammered. And a preacher is in that category today. And you have to be spiritually and mentally tougher than I was when you start. But the other suggestion that I give to guys is to establish your beliefs and your territory early. Nothing will kill you like vacillation. You got two camps in your church, and people pulling you in different directions. I think you're better off stating up front, okay, here's our stand on life. Here's our stand on same-sex marriage. Here's our stand on political issues. Here's our stand on gender dysphoria. Here's where I'm going to come down. I'm going to try to be as loving as I can, speak the truth, but I'm going to speak the truth in love. But here's where we stand. Now, you're going to lose some people, yeah, but everybody knows where you stand, and you're not going to keep battling, and it helps you to be strong and courageous from the very beginning. I think what's tearing people apart is they're trying to please both sides.
Hmm. Well, in light of that struggle, multiple battles, like how should a pastor view things like rest and sabbatical, time off, I'll couch it this way too, Bob. There are lay leaders, elders, other people in the church that don't quite understand why does a pastor need a sabbatical? We get vacation time. Why does a pastor need more than the average Joe? What would you say to that?
Well, I think that you're coming back to the core problem we talked about before about dysfunctional leadership. You go back to the first mention of elders in the Bible. God said to Moses, I'm going to appoint elders who will come alongside and help you so that you don't carry the burden alone. You need some elders who are big preacher supporters and who understand. If you don't have that, then you need to bring somebody in from the outside to train your elders or to take them to the E2 stuff or somewhere where they're going to get exposure and expand their vision of what it costs to be a preacher. I think there are several things here. I'll try not to ramble too long, but I about 20 years into my ministry, I hit a brick wall where I said, look, I went to my elders and I'm so thankful for good elders. That's why I stayed for 40 years. I said, look, guys, everything looks good, but I'm not doing very good. I'm overextended. I feel like I'm not doing anything well right now, and I need some help. Well, they asked me to share my schedule. I shared my schedule, and they came alongside and said, okay, here's what you need. You need to quit preaching Sunday nights. You need to quit going to the hospital so much. We'll help you there. We'll go to the hospital. Well, you need to quit marriage counseling. You're not very good at it to begin with, but why don't you refer people? And so they gave me some suggestions how I could cut. And I asked them for a sabbatical. They said, how long would you like to be gone? I said, I'd like to be gone about 4 months. They said, you got to be kidding. And these are guys who are sympathetic.
Yeah.
They said, we're in the middle of a building program and you want to be gone 4 months. That's not healthy for us. So they began hashing around and one of them came, say, Bob, you take 3 weeks of vacation every summer. Why don't you add 2 weeks onto that and take 5 weeks away from church every summer and make 2 weeks study break? And I latched onto that. And Alan, that became my salvation the last 20 years.
Yeah.
That was like a mini sabbatical every year. I am not big. My son's taking a 9-week sabbatical right now. I've talked to a lot of guys who have taken long sabbaticals, and I think 9, 10 weeks is too long. But every year I would get 5 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I'd take July off, 5 Sundays in a row.
Mm-hmm.
I'd get to May and I'm hanging on by my fingertips. And hey, I'm in a good situation. I don't know how guys do it in bad situations. I'm saying if I can just last to July, I think I can survive. And sometimes when I left in July, I didn't care if I ever came back. And we would often, as a family, go to Gatlinburg on vacation. We had a guy in the church had a cabin down there. And the first week, I wouldn't do anything except give attention to my family. And to this day, my boys will take their families down to Gatlinburg and because that was their greatest memories. They had me 100%. This is where I learned to swim. This is where I learned to fish. This is where I learned to play golf. And, and my best memories. And then sometimes I would, about second or third week, I'd go to a bookstore, Christian bookstore in Knoxville. I'd buy a couple hundred books, spend a couple hours. I'd go home and start reading, and then I'd start studying. And about the fourth week, I'm chomping at the bit to come back. Fifth week, man, I can't wait to get back. When I come back, it's like a revival. It's healthy for the church, and it's healthy for other guys on staff to preach or to bring in somebody else. And if your church can't survive without you for 5 weeks, you're building a preacher-centered church.
Yeah.
So I advocate guys take long breaks away from the pulpit. Something else that helped me was I had hobbies that I really enjoyed that had nothing to do with church, almost nothing to do with church. I liked playing golf. I liked playing softball. One year I played on a competitive softball team. I must have played 80 some softball games. I performed 2 weddings with a softball uniform under my suit. They were Greek weddings. But it gave me forward to that had nothing to do with church. And I think guys need to have a hobby, was woodworking or it's, fishing or whatever. Uh, but I also think a key is to learn to compartmentalize your life and to shift gears. The ministry requires an ability to shift gears, and it takes a while to learn that because you're never going to go home and everything's right. And I learned to go home, leave at 4:30 or 5 o'clock, say, Lord, that's the best I can do today, and go home and turn it off. Come back in early the next morning. Ben Merrill used to have he said he pounded a nail, every house ever lived, pounded a nail in the door between the garage and the house. So people thought it was to hang a hat. He said that's where I was reminded symbolically to hang all the junk that happened during the course of the day and give attention to my family. And I think guys, there are a lot of jobs that require you got to shift gears. You're not unspiritual, you're not uncaring to be able to do a funeral at 4 o'clock and go home at 5:30 and laugh with your wife. That's just what the occupation, what God's calling, let me put it that way, God's calling requires of you.
Yeah, you mentioned your family, and you know, I've only heard good about you and Judy and Rusty and Phil. So beyond the study break, which was annually once a year, and I'm sure they all look forward to it, how did you balance your family marriage commitment with a ministry that had to be, high demand?
Yeah. And if you're not, every ministry is high demand. And there's a one sense in which this growing rapidly expanding congregation is high demand. There's another sense in which a big church is easier
Hmm.
because you got a lot of help around you and not people aren't scrutinizing every little move you make, and their expectation of you is less. But I made up my mind. I'd seen too many preachers' kids go south, and in my generation growing up, P.H. Wellstremer, I think it was, he had a son played football in Canton, Ohio, and he boasted he'd never seen his son play football.
Hmm.
He's married to the church. I said, well, that can't be right. And so family was a priority with me. And my boys played basketball several years. One was a freshman, one was a senior, and they had basketball games 2 nights a week. 4 nights a week for 4 months, they had basketball game. I think I missed one game. And I would maneuver around it a little bit, but I didn't want them looking up in the stands and say, my dad's not here because he's got a meeting.
Okay.
And they both sat the bench. That's amazing. But to this day, I never hear him say I neglected them. And I tried to be home when they were little, when they were put to bed. And they knew they could come in to my office anytime, or they could call me anytime. And I think they never questioned that they were a priority. Judy probably questioned sometimes whether she was a priority, but uh, I learned to remind her in various ways that she was the most important person in my life. I think the question in marriage is, am I the most important person? And if we can convince our wives they're more important than the church, they're more important than our quote success, that goes a long way to keeping the marriage together.
Yeah. Well, two more questions. One, I want to go back to, let's say you have a very functional elder team. I mean, these are good guys. They are leading well. They love the church. And they have a pastor who's burned out. I mean, he's exhausted. Now he's making bad decisions. You talked about the pastor, if you've got to struggle with your elder team, but what if the elder team is functioning well? What would you tell them and how to approach or deal with their pastor who's crashing?
Well, first of all, he needs love. He needs to know that you care. He needs you to sit down with him and say, "Hey, we love you as a pastor. We think you're overextended. What can we do to help you?" Just an understanding soul, knowing he's got somebody in the church on his team means a whole lot. And sometimes we need sympathy and understanding more than we need adjustments. But the second thing is adjustment. To ask him, where do you think you're strong and where do you think you're not as strong? And have him list those areas. People get burned out not because they're overworked most of the time. They get burned out because they're working too much, spending too much time in areas where they're not gifted. If you're spending time in the area of your gifts, it energizes you, and you get almost always some tangible rewards. Pardon me. What happens in ministry is that guys respond to the immediate requests and they get involved in areas where they're not gifted. I tell guys, you don't have to ask, you don't have to take a gift test for me to tell you where you're gifted. You just tell me, what do you do when you do it? Time flies for you. You put me in a room to study for a sermon, I can look up, 3 hours goes by in a flash. You put me in a marriage counseling session, 10 minutes, I'm looking up at the clock, saying, oh man, I got 40 more minutes to spend here. So I need to get out of marriage counseling. And I need to say, oh, one of my priorities is studying for sermons. So now everybody's got to do some things that they don't necessarily like to do. But the longer you're in ministry, the more you ought to be focused on the area of your gifts, and the more you ought to have volunteers or hired people around you who are taking away those areas where you're not so gifted. If you're terrible at administration, find them. Either hire somebody, or in a smaller church, you find some retired person who loves administration and channel those things to that person and trust them. You don't have to micromanage everything. So I think you can help your preacher by helping him understand his gifts and then forcing him to take at least one day off a week. You know, when I first started in ministry, I felt guilty if I took Saturdays off. But if you're forced to do it, pretty soon you get in the groove and you realize this is healthy for me. And you can coach him by encouraging him to take a day off and do something special with his wife.
Good. So what are you most excited about in church world, and what are some trends maybe that concern you?
This is my favorite question that you asked me, by the way. And I did some thinking about it last night. I think I'm going to write a blog about it. I broke it down like this. I've got some notes. I'm encouraged by the quality of young people who are going into ministry. I see guys a whole lot sharper and a whole lot more committed than I was at that age. I mean, some sharp guys and also some second career guys being called into ministry. But I'm really concerned about the quantity. Bible college closing. You go to a Bible college, how many of you going into ministry? Very few. And unless we find some new channel and make adjustments, we're going to have a tremendous preacher shortage in a decade or less. So that's one thing that encourages me. One thing concerns me. I'm I'm encouraged by preachers' efforts today to serve their community. We do that so much better than when I first started. You know, we were all about evangelism and church growth, but preachers do a really good job. Church leaders do a good job of getting involved in their community and providing food for the hungry and getting into schools, backpack for kids in the school, all kinds of things in the community that give them a better reputation in the local community. I think that's really healthy. My concern, on the other hand, is that we be content with just serving the community and we forget about evangelism and we forget our primary purpose and we start gravitating toward the social gospel. Mm-hmm. And our focus is all those things that we're doing that are tangible. And evangelism, John Stott said, evangelism is prickly because it calls people to repentance. And you get all kind of commendations if you're loving the community. You're not getting as many commendations from the world if you're about evangelism. I remember we had what we called a shine event, which is a great event. Alan, is it ministering to people who have children with disabilities? I think it was a shine dance, and it is a emotional heart warmer. And I heard some people say this is our church's finest hour.
Mm.
No, it's a great program. I think our church's finest hour was when we had that baptism Sunday, and then people were saved for eternity. So I think that's something I'm encouraged by, something I'm concerned by. I got two or three others. I don't want to preach at you, but
No, keep going, keep going.
I think we really are doing well at being relevant. We understand the culture, and we're trying to relate to the culture and where people are, and we've got all kinds of um, visuals, and we know how to be relevant. But on the other hand, there's not much call to holiness. And let me give you an example. And I don't know where I come down on this, honestly, but I have concern about everybody doing Sunday at the movies. And you know, when I grew up, my parents were so holy, they wouldn't let us go to movies. And now we're bringing them in church and serving popcorn, and it's almost like we're endorsing that whole industry that has done so much to corrupt America. And I'm not saying it's wrong, because I know some good things come out of that and needs to be handled right. But we're so eager to be relevant, we're losing our call to separation and holiness. And I think the church of the future is going to be strong if it is distinctive from the world, instead of saying how close, how much we can be like the world. I think we need to be distinctive from the world.
Yeah, amen. We're seeing an influx of college kids that it's so wild. I mean, on one hand, there's college kids that want nothing to do with God, and then we have this group that they're all about hymns, expository teaching, the gospel, prayer, worship. All the basics. Uh, you know, that they don't want the fluff, they don't want the production, they don't want the lights. Do you see that?
I got a grandson, 21 years old, sophomore at Samford University in Birmingham. He goes 3 times to the Asbury revival. Hour and a half. He gets home one night like at 2 in the morning or something like that. I mean, he's not taking a girlfriend. He's genuinely interested.
Yeah.
I said, Andy, what do you like about that? He said, Pop, there are no big name bands, no smoke machines, not even any words on the screen sometimes. He said, my generation, I think we like it more simple.
Yeah.
Now, I think, and I'm not a futurist, I've been wrong about the future a lot. But if I were going to guess, I think the pendulum is going to swing back to more authentic, more simple worship. And just like my generation held on to the organ and piano and hymns too long, I think some of these guys have been so schooled in contemporary worship and the electric guitar, the the bass drum, loud music, they're going to hold on to it too long, because they associate that too much with relevance. And I think we've got to be sensitive to authenticity more.
Isn't that amazing that I was schooled on church growth and to the fine details of transitions of no downtime, song to song or song to speaker. And I think there's a younger generation that wants the holy pauses. They don't squirm when there's silence between songs or between speakers.
Yeah,
It's actually
yeah.
a thing.
I agree, and I think we ought to do, if we're worshiping, we ought to do it the best of our ability. But authenticity, and in my generation, it was excellence,
Mhm.
because things have been sloppy. But it's not excellence that's impressing these kids; it's authenticity. Even when we do videos, they'll say, "Don't worry about it if you have if it looks, do it on your phone."
Yeah, yeah.
this is one other thing I had written down here, that we're so good about visuals and innovation and all the programming upstage. To now I see the world laughing at some of the mega church preachers' gimmicks.
Yep.
We've lost confidence. I'm concerned about losing confidence in the power of the Bible,
Yeah.
in the power of the gospel. And I'm encouraging guys, look, get off the 4 week catchy phrases series and just go through a book of the Bible and just teach the Bible. And how many times have you, Alan, had somebody come to you and say, I was struggling with a problem. I came to church and I couldn't get over it. You preached on that very subject that day. It really helped me. Thank you. And you feel so good till you look at what you preached on. It had nothing to do with their
Yeah. You didn't say anything. Yeah.
the,
Right.
the, the Holy Spirit works through the Bible. And if I could just get guys to preach the Bible more and I say if it takes you 16 weeks to go through Ephesians, that's okay.
Yeah.
Then come up for air and do a series on President Hertz or something for 4 weeks and take a break. But in the long run, it'll make your church stronger. I just think we're so concerned about being relevant and being hip that we've lost confidence in the power of the gospel to do its thing.
I agree. Hey, is there anything that I did not cover that you had great notes on and you were quite excited to share?
My favorite question.
Because my last question is not from me, so I'll let you check your notes, but then I'll ask this other question.
Will you ask me the question and I'll see if there's anything else.
Well, so I said we're going to start and end with a question from one of your friends. So Greg Allen said, "Ask Bob what he would have done had he not been a pastor."
Mhm. I used to think I wanted to be a coach, but the more I've watched, Denny Crum was a great coach at U of L, a friend of mine. His demeanor, I wouldn't have been a great coach. I think I would have. I'd like to have been like a sports announcer. Take the spirituality out of it. To be a baseball or a basketball announcer, that would have been fun for me. You know, uh, but to be honest with you, I went into the ministry at the last resort, kind of kicking and screaming, but I never looked back because I felt it was what God wanted me to do, and some good things happened. So I never questioned that. And that's one of the things I'd say in closing, Alan, to guys who get discouraged. One of the things that I tell them is to remember their calling, that you're in ministry not because you sat down and looked over 25 different occupations. So, ministry, I think that'd be fun. You're in ministry because God called you into ministry. I was in front of like 300 ministers and I asked them how many felt called into ministry. Almost everybody raised their hand. I said, how many of you had a dramatic calling? I bet it was 6 or 7 guys. Most of the time we can't talk about the voice of God or an earth-shaking experience, but we tried ministry or somebody suggested we started teaching and we went to Bible, we tested it and turned out, but we feel called. We feel like it's what God. Now, I point out that the Apostle Paul had a dramatic calling, struck down by a light on the road to Damascus. And I wonder if Paul, when Ananias came to him and said, God has chosen you as a vessel, he must have said, I know what, I'm going to go to the Jews, man. If anybody knows how to relate to the Jewish people, I do. I'm a Hebrew of the Hebrew. No, I'm going to send you to the Gentiles. Oh, Gentiles, man. They're not, well, I guess I surely reach the Gentiles. I'm a lot smarter than they are. No, I'm going to show you how much you're going to suffer from. I say, I wonder if the Apostle Paul ever got tired of hearing people brag about Simon Peter's sermon on the day of Pentecost. 3,000 people responded to the invitation. Man, it was terrific. You never read that happened to the Apostle Paul. Read, people scoffed at him. And people said, "Ah, well, listen later. We're not ready right now." And a few believe, but a few believe. But Paul never quit. And when he got thrown in prison and he's hauled before King Agrippa, he recounted his calling, and he said, "Agrippa, I was not disobedient to that heavenly calling." And that's our challenge in ministry. Not to compare ourselves and see how successful we are, but like the Apostle Paul said, I'm not going to be disobedient to my heavenly calling. It may change. I may do something different, like you're doing something different now, but you're still called in ministry to not quit. And that's what we need, some guys who are tough enough to tough it out through because they're calling.
Thanks for what you've done. Thanks for what you keep doing. Appreciate this very much, Bob.
I appreciate you asking, and I just can't. I want to emphasize one more thing to you. Okay, you are needed in this retreat stuff. You're right on target. I'm going to try to pass on my retreats to Tom Ellsworth because my time's growing short. But we need more and more guys boosting these preachers up. We're talking a lot about recruiting new preachers, which we need to do, but we need to retain some guys. We're losing guys we shouldn't be losing. So you got a monumental task, but it's such an important one. I'm glad you're going to do it.